So it's 1 o'clock. I think I'm going to get started. Welcome to the informational webinar on the Infrastructure 6 Awards for Shared Resource Laboratories for Stem Cell-Based Modeling Program. I'm going to share my screen. So I am the lead. My name is Uta Grisama. I am the lead on this program together with Rosa Caneda-Viles, who is the Vice President of Scientific Programs and Education at CIRM. Also on this webinar to answer questions are Doug Kearney, who is Associate Director of Grants Management, Gil Sembrano, who is Vice President of Portfolio and Review, and also Haley Lamb, who is Associate Director of Portfolio and Review. And we're also joined by Janie Byram, who is a science officer in the Scientific Programs and Education team, and she'll help with the questions later on. And Doug Guillen is running this webinar. So thank you all for being here. This webinar is being recorded, and we will post it to the CIRM YouTube channel. And we will also provide a link to the slides. So I will hand it over now to Dr. Rosa Caneda-Viles to provide a little context for this opportunity.
Thank you, Uta. So this program is actually is built under the context of our mission, which is to accelerate world-class science to deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse California and the world. And as many of you are very familiar now with our 5-year strategic plan, to accomplish the mission, our current strategic plan for the next 5 years has 3 main themes: to advance world-class science, to deliver real-world solutions for treating diseases, and to provide opportunity for all. And the Shared Resource Labs program answers to the first theme, advance world-class science, the 2 goals, develop competency hubs and building knowledge networks, as well as build a diverse and highly skilled workforce. These opportunities focus on building infrastructure that will accelerate shared usage of specialized technologies through competency hubs. And this is actually representing the first installment of these technology competency hubs for CIRM. And together with the data knowledge network infrastructure that we are developing, is not out yet, is a new program, will broadly connect and empower California's regenerative medicine research ecosystem towards advancing world-class science and therapeutic innovation. I would also like to take the opportunity to point out that this program addresses Prop 14 stipulation to reestablish the Shared Labs program, and in doing so, prioritize applications that enhance geographic distribution of shared labs across the state. And with that, I will leave it to Uta, who's been doing a fantastic job in leading and developing this program. Uta, go ahead.
Thanks, Rosa. So I'll start by providing an overview of the Infrastructure 6 Shared Resource Labs program, by talking a little bit about its goals and the eligibility requirements. I'll touch on the budget and the activities associated with it. I'll go over the application components, the review process and review criteria, and some resources for applicants. And then there should be a good amount of time after I'm done with that to answer your questions. We will answer the questions you've already posted when you registered. Thank you for that. And then for any new questions that come up during this webinar, please type them into the Q&A function of Zoom. So I'll start with the goals of this program and the eligibility requirements. To capitalize on the promise of stem cell-based modeling for advancing knowledge about human disease mechanisms, and also for identifying new therapeutic targets and biomarkers, as well as drug candidates, and to leverage the existing state-of-the-art expertise that exists in stem cell-based modeling here in California, The objectives of this opportunity are to broaden access to stem cell-based models across California, to increase access to educational opportunities in stem cell-based techniques, and to develop a sustainable stem cell core infrastructure. In addition, we envision that the funded shared resource labs will function as a network. And one of the goals of this network will be to advance standards and reproducibility. This is listed here as the fourth objective of this program, and I'll talk about this fourth objective later. For now, I'm focusing on the three objectives I mentioned first that pertain to individual shared resource labs, and they're listed again up here in the top right corner. So examples of how shared resource labs for stem cell-based modeling will function to meet these objectives include providing researchers access to cell culture facilities to conduct stem cell-based modeling experiments, and also provide them with access to high-cost and highly specialized technologies that are needed to conduct and analyze stem cell-based modeling experiments. Our shared resource labs can also provide researchers access to well-characterized and unmodified or modified human pluripotent stem cell collections. They can provide them access to partially or fully differentiated stem cell models. And this kind of access could be in the core itself or by shipping materials. The cores can also share their expertise by training researchers in the creation and use of stem cell-based models. And again, the training can be offered locally in the cores through hands-on training or via regular workshops, classes, video tutorials, etc., for broad participation. Another potential function of a shared resource lab is to provide student education opportunities by providing educators access to formal techniques courses in stem cell culturing and stem cell-based modeling for student education and other student experiences with stem cell-based modeling, for instance, workforce development in partnership with CIRM-funded training programs. I'd like to note here that researcher training can also be offered through a formal techniques course, and I'll touch on that a little later. And then finally, we expect that shared resource labs will implement approaches that will ensure their long-term sustainability, such as fees for service or obtaining alternative funding sources. What are the eligibility requirements for this opportunity? The modeling expertise that will be offered in a shared resource lab must be for in vitro models using human stem or progenitor cells. The applicant institution must be a California nonprofit institution, and an institution may only submit one application to this program. The leadership for overseeing the establishment, operations, and quality of a shared resource lab may consist of one or two individuals. The applicant program director must hold a faculty level position and must at least commit 5% effort, while a second leadership person, if proposed, may hold a staff position, and together this overall leadership must commit at least 20% effort. So now I will discuss the budget for an SRL award, and also the activities associated, the activities that CIRM will support. But before going into that, as I'm sure you're aware by now, this program intends to fund two different types of shared resource labs. The RFA for Infrastructure 6.1 is for establishing SRLs that should be designed to provide access to stem cell-based models, training, specialized equipment, educational opportunities in geographic areas of California where access to models is limited, while the RFA for Infrastructure 6.2 is for what we call the Enhancing Expansion Shared Resource Labs, and they're to enable leading experts in stem cell-based modeling to share their models and expertise locally and broadly across California. So over the next few slides, I'll introduce you to the main cost categories and how they align with the activities supported under this opportunity. There are three main cost categories I'll be talking about. The first being about renovations and equipment. Renovations are only, or funding for renovations is only available under the 6.1 opportunity. The second cost category is for the operations of the shared labs. And then the third is the optional stem cell techniques course. So this slide is to show you the award duration and budget caps for the Shared Resource Lab Awards. They're, of course, listed in the RFA, so I won't read these numbers, but I'd like to use this slide to point out that the overall budget caps listed here are for the total costs for an award, including allowable indirect and facilities costs. You can also see here that there's a budget cap for each of the cost categories. And furthermore, importantly, for the 6.2 RFA or awards, they have to co-fund 20% of the operations costs. I now have a slide for each cost category showing the activities funded within that category. So as part of creating the core facility for stem cell-based modeling, funds are available for renovation and equipment. Again, to renovate laboratory space is only available under RFA 6.1, but both RFAs provide funding for acquisition of major equipment necessary for culturing and analyzing stem cell-based models, including incubators, hoods, freezers, microscopes, cell sorters, sequencers, etc. I want to point out that there should be no commingling of CIRM funds with federal funding for the purchase of new capital equipment to keep CIRM-funded equipment free from federal funds should restrictions should federal restrictions arise. I will now go over the activities that are funded under the operations budget. So first, the operations budget does contribute to the creation of the core. For instance, it can pay for personnel overseeing the whole project, including the acquisition of the equipment, and it also can pay for collaborations to establish the stem cell-based modeling expertise in the core facility. Once the core is established, the operations funds can then be used to maintain the core, to support use of the core by investigators from the grantee and nearby institutions, to provide specialized services necessary for manipulating and analyzing the stem cell-based models, such as gene editing, omics analyses, bioinformatics, and other things. Operations funds can also be used to train researchers in the creation and use of models through individual training, workshops, online materials, and other approaches. Both shared resource lab types are expected to provide access to the expertise and resources at their own and nearby institutions. That's the locally in this bullet. But a distinction between the 6.1 and 6.2 opportunity is that the 6.2 awards are expected to share their expertise and resources also broadly across California. Since the purpose of an establishing 6.1 shared resource lab is to broaden the geographic access to stem cell-based models, this can also be achieved by providing remote cloud-based access to experimentation. Furthermore, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the 6.1 opportunity. The 6.1 shared resource labs may choose to offer educational activities such as courses, workshops, science fairs, remote projects, etc., that are designed to stimulate interest in stem cell and regenerative medicine research and attract and retain students from diverse backgrounds into the field. This could be in addition to the formal stem cell techniques course, which I'll describe in the next slide. And then I also want to point out that for the 6.1 applicants, that they could choose to have a focus of their core on research support or on educational support. That'll be up to the applicant to decide what is needed in their community and works best. And then finally, the last operational activity I'll be talking about is the fact that the program directors that are funded are expected to participate in shared resource lab networks activities. And again, I'll touch on that part a little bit later. Now, the last cost category, the third cost category I mentioned is for the optional stem cell techniques course. This hands-on course will teach general stem cell culturing techniques and the creation and use of stem cell-based models. It can be designed to serve CIRM educational programs or other hands-on stem cell or gene therapy related educational needs in California. But it can also, or exclusively, be designed to train researchers in the art of stem cell-based modeling. And so I'd like to point out here that you have some flexibility, and you may distribute costs associated with researcher training into the techniques course, or as I showed on the previous slide, into the operational course costs as well. It's whatever makes most sense in the context of what you're proposing. What activities are not supported by the Infrastructure 6 program? The main point I'd like to make here is that applicants will not propose to conduct specific research studies, and that although research projects that will make use of the shared resource labs, but they will have their own funding sources for conducting that research. As should be clear by now, Infrastructure 2 applications cannot apply for renovation or facility improvement funds, and there should be no scientific overlap. Now, to accommodate the different types of activities that I just described that are part of a Shared Resource Labs award, and to build in a ramp down of CIRM operational funding to prepare for self-sustainability of the course, we divided these awards into 3 phases, A, B, and C, and assigned specific timeframes to those phases. Phase A represents the establishment of the core. Again, it involves renovation for 6.1, equipping, staffing, establishing the stem cell-based models, establishing training, educational programs, while phase B represents the CIRM supported operations. And then phase C is meant to be for continued operations, but with tapered CIRM support to start implementing long-term sustainability approaches. Now, we realize that there might be challenges that awardees encounter that are out of their control, such as, for instance, supply chain issues during phase A. And so CIRM will work with awardees to adjust the timing of the phases as needed. And so the last comment I'll make regarding CIRM-supported activities relates to the participation of the funded program directors in the CIRM-coordinated Shared Resource Labs network. The program directors will be members of a steering committee, and the task of this steering committee will be to establish processes and systems for sharing the know-how, knowledge, educational resources, and other resources that are part of the core you're creating. The committee is also going to work to drive towards setting some standards among shared resource labs, and there will be tasked with developing collaborative approaches toward improving reproducibility of stem cell-based models, as will be discussed and considered by this steering committee. All right, I will now switch to going over the application components of Shared Resource Labs award. when you go into our grants management system and into your specific account, you click on Open Programs, and you'll see links to the 2 different applications. So at this stage, you decide you must choose which whether you'll be submitting an infrastructure 6.1 or 6.2 application. You can of course look at both, but you only be submitting one. When you then enter into the application web page, there are online sections to the application that you need to fill out. And importantly, there is an uploads section where you upload other documents that I'm going to talk about in a moment. But importantly, you'll also find the required templates that I will mention. The links to these templates are in this upload section. So listed here are all the components of a shared resource lab application. The online components include filling out details related to eligibility, key personnel, and the budget, while the additional application components are uploaded in the uploads section. There are required uploads for which you must use the templates that we provided. As I said, the links to those templates are in that section. There is a scientific proposal for both RFAs, and there is a separate facilities proposal for 6.1 award applications. There are templates for the biographical sketches that you are providing, as well as the other support document for the program director and a budget worksheet. Additional required uploads, but no template is provided, are for renovation improvement or renovation documents, letters of support, and quotes and other budget data. And then there are some optional uploads, such as for licenses and MTAs. And if you are proposing a stem cell techniques course, you would upload the course syllabus here. In the next slide, I'll provide more detail about the budget part of the application. And there are 4 pieces really to the budget within this overall application. In the online application, there is something called the funds calculator, and that's also where you provide your budget justification. In the next slide, I'll go over the budget worksheet, and I'll also mention the quotes and other budget data. So I'm showing here a little outline of the budget worksheet. The budget is complex, and so we have developed an Excel worksheet that you will use to provide budget details. There are several tabs in the Excel template, and these tabs are listed here in this middle column. I'd like to point out, or just to briefly go over, there's renovations tab, equipment tab, a tab for each phase. I'd like to point out here that the equipment maintenance, you may choose to categorize the costs for equipment maintenance either under the operations budget within the phases, or under the lab equipment cost category. That is your choice. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is that the average, as I mentioned, phase C is ramping down CIRM support for operational funds. And so the worksheet will force you to have average monthly costs in phase C that are half of the average monthly costs in phase B. The last tab calculates the total request. As you fill out these various tabs, the last tab will calculate a total request for your application. And then some of the numbers, and it's explained in that tab, will have to be transferred to the funds calculator in the online application. And like I said, the online application also then is where you provide your budget justification and any quotes you have, for instance, for equipment that you should provide in your application. I want to make the point that quotes related to renovations in a 6.1 application can be submitted at just in time. So once you're funded or once you're approved for funding, those renovation kinds of quotes may come in at that point if they're not available at the time of application, as they often may not be that early in the process. Okay. Another important piece I wanted to mention about the application is that there are several types of letters of support that are required that you submit. We ask that you provide letters of interested users of the core to show that if you build it, they will come, and that there's an interest in the expertise and the services that you are planning to offer. And I'd like to use this opportunity to emphasize that the shared resource labs should seek to attract investigators new to stem cell-based modeling by either training them so they can bring the modeling expertise to their own labs, or by enabling them to test hypotheses using a stem cell-based model in your core without having to establish the model in their own lab. There might be clinicians with ideas about a particular question, but have no interest in actually establishing the models, but it would be an opportunity for them to participate in this field. We also this would be also an opportunity to provide letters of support from collaborators who, for instance, will be involved in transferring their expertise to the core. We would expect you to have a letter of institutional support confirming the core space that either already exists in a 6.2 application for you to add equipment, or for a 6.1, the core space that will be renovated and equipped. Any other commitments that might be made by the institution. Infrastructure 6.2 applicants will need documentation for the required co-funding, which can come from their own institution or from elsewhere. We would also, any additional support you can provide, documentation. And then regarding the last bullet here about contingency funds, there is a section, I'd like to explain a little more. There's a section in the proposal template where we ask you to identify project risks and how you plan to mitigate those risks. And this could be related to, these kinds of risks could be related to the timeline. There could be timeline delays that you anticipate. There could be equipment failures, costs exceeding what you budgeted. There could be reagents shortages, variable interest, for instance, in the use of your core, etc. So there's some risks that we anticipate, or that we want you to anticipate and speak to how you would mitigate those risks. And then some of those mitigation measures may incur extra cost. And for those, we expect you to have access to contingency funds. This slide is just briefly to ask to please follow the formatting instructions in the proposal template and don't create your own templates, please. The application also has a section to speak to your approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion in implementing and running this core. Here you can describe how you plan to ensure that the core users and recipients of stem cell-based models and expertise represent diverse goals, approaches, perspectives, and backgrounds, how you will ensure participation of diverse or underserved populations in educational activities or in the use of your core, how, and you can talk about how the Shared Resource Labs team represents diverse and inclusive perspectives and experiences. And you can describe your track record for promoting and valuing diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can also describe how you plan to offer stem cell lines with ancestral and sex diversity that may increase the applicability of the outcomes of the research that is supported by your core to diverse populations. And then we ask that you talk about knowledge sharing and data sharing in your application. Knowledge sharing refers to the capture and dissemination of information to get the word out about the models and services that your core offers and inform others about best practices and resources for the stem cell-based models you offer. In the data sharing plan, you will talk about how you will make raw and processed data as well as metadata available to the research community. And this is in the context of your shared resource lab. This refers to the data produced during operations for cell line and cell model quality control and validation, such as omics, fax, or imaging data that might be generated during the QC processes. And we envision that this kind of data sharing may aid in the reproducibility efforts that the steering committee may pursue. The data that is generated as part of the research projects in the core that may take place in the core will not be part of the core's data sharing responsibilities, and those research projects will implement their own data sharing plans. I'll go now over go over briefly over the review process and the review criteria. After you submit your application, there will be an eligibility review at CIRM. That determines whether the application can be reviewed. It then goes to our grants working group that will determine the scientific merit of the application. And for the infrastructure 6.1 applications, it will also be reviewed by a facilities working group that will judge the merit of the facilities application. And then with those two reviews, the information generated there, it will go to our board, the Independent Citizens Oversight Committee, which will make the final approval decisions. The high-level review criteria for the two opportunities are the same. Details differ, so I do encourage you to read specifically in the RFAs about some of the nuances there. But overall, the review criteria for the grants working group for the scientific review are: does the proposed shared resource lab offer a significant value proposition? Is the project well planned and designed? Is it feasible? If the techniques course is proposed, is it well designed? And does the project effectively uphold the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And for the facilities review for the infrastructure 6.1 applications, the criteria are whether the proposed improvement project supports the applicant's proposed core, supports it well in terms of its research and educational goals. Are the renovation and facility improvements feasible as proposed? Does the facility include appropriate research equipment and laboratory configuration in support of the shared resource lab activities? Are the costs appropriate? And does the applicant ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion goals for the design and construction part of the application? My last informative slide here is to just point out that we do have information and resources for applicants on our website. If you hover over the researcher tab, there is, for instance, an information for applicants section, and there you can find more information about data sharing and management plans. CIRM also has a human-induced pluripotent stem cell repository that may be of value for when you design your core, and I encourage you to check out that resource as well. And my last slide is to please do not hesitate to contact me with any questions you may have. I expect a lot of Zoom meetings over the next few weeks to help. But you can also contact grants management or review for budgeting and administrative questions and review questions. And importantly, the application is due on August 29 by 2 p.m. our time here in California. All right, so I will stop here and we will start answering your questions. I'll stop my sharing, and Janie has joined us, and we'll start going over the questions that are coming in.
Sounds good. Wonderful. Thanks. So yes, we'll now answer your questions in the Q&A section of the webinar. And so to submit a question, there's an icon at the bottom of the Zoom banner that says Q&A. where you can submit any questions that you haven't done prior to the webinar starting. But in the meantime, we will start with a question that was submitted at webinar registration. This question reads, how important are innovative cores versus more traditional technologies to this mechanism? And what about core sustainability? So I'll send that question to Uta.
Yes. So thank you for the question. I think it's a great question because there are some models out there that are very well established. And then there are, of course, some really cutting edge and much more complex models, but also, of course, perhaps more predictive and representative of a particular human tissue or organ. So it's an important question as you decide what is it that you're going to be offering in your core. Obviously, you will be focusing on something. You can't offer all models that exist, and so you will be focusing on certain organs. But in terms of really innovative versus more traditional technologies, I want you to just balance and think about what are the needs in your research community that you're hearing about, that your core would help support, and how can you support innovative research? Maybe innovative research can be supported with simpler models. And as you think about your core, you also want to convey how feasible it is that you can establish a functional core as you're deciding about this question. So I hope this was helpful. Core sustainability, I will just repeat that is a goal of this opportunity, is that you think from the very beginning about how you will make this core more long-term sustainable. If you have further questions about that, please do contact me.
Okay, this question is from Amy Sproles that says, is it also important not to mix California state funds with CIRM funds for equipment purchases? And there's a follow-up. For example, our institution has received significant state funding for our polytechnic transformation. Some of those dollars will be allocated to launching our new cellular molecular biotechnology training program. Would it be allowable to use some of those dollars for equipment purchases and or the facility? And I'll send that question to Doug.
Thanks, Janie. Well, as a state agency, I don't imagine that there would be an issue there, but we'll have to, consider all those aspects. But my initial answer would be that would be an appropriate mixing of funds to purchase equipment.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to just support what Doug just said. We would consider that would be in-kind support, as Rosa, I think, didn't mention in the beginning, but Proposition 14 actually talks about also prioritizing applications that have, for instance, in-kind support. And the more you have of that, even existing equipment or equipment purchased, even federally purchased equipment, if it's just paid with federal resources or state resources, that's all in service of this core, would be highly valued.
Craig Walsh is asking, we have put on a stem cell techniques course for many years, and it's great to see that the SRL will offer funding to support this type of course. We also have ideas of adding additional training that is more specific to more cutting edge technologies that we plan to offer through our SRL. Would it be appropriate to include such new training ideas with the stem cell techniques course, and how best to incorporate this into the application? So could the core facility provide, say, pardon me. And so he says, in other words, can we add modules from our advanced core offerings as add-ons to our base course?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, there's no question that we want you to be innovative and cutting edge in what you are teaching. And again, you can balance, obviously also we do need very basic training in stem cell culturing, but yes, please feel very much free to offer advanced culturing technologies in your stem cell techniques course. Absolutely. We would like you to update the course if you had it already offered previously.
Great. For infrastructure 6.2, could you elaborate on the 20% co-funding? Is there any restriction on the source of this co-funding? And perhaps this is a question for, oh, go ahead, Ota.
Thanks, Janie. So the 20% co-funding, so we had the budget cap on the 6.2 operations is 1.5 million, and the 20% is part of that 1.5 million. So in effect, if you propose a total of 1.5 million operations, $300,000 of that would have to be co-funded. The source of that co-funding, this is operational funding, can be any source, including federal funding. Any source that you can muster is okay.
Is the one application per institute related separated or in combination for 6.1 and 6.2? So that is one per institution per type, or only one per institution regardless of which type?
Yeah, it's only one application per institution, only a 6.1 or a 6.2, not both.
And for infrastructure 6.2, can you expand on increased access to educational opportunities and stem cell based techniques? How are you defining increasing access? Should access be increased to people who would not have access otherwise? So maybe partnerships with community college would be valuable.
Yeah, thank you. So for 6.2, the main core, the way I described it, is really focused on researcher support. And I would anticipate that educational support would come in through the techniques course, if you want to offer that. But it would certainly be very highly valued if you're thinking about increasing access to students or populations to have access to this course, such as collaborating with community colleges, etc. So when you write your proposal for the techniques course, similar to the research support, where we would like you to explain who will come when you build it, similarly for the techniques course, we would like you to tell us who would come if you offer it. And so there could be support letters from, like you say, community colleges, for instance, that can attest to the diversity of the student populations that they think might participate.
How do you see the priority between generating a service that enables and educates the California research community versus a core that performs specific endpoint assays for a user? For example, as a general formula, should a core perform specific physiological assays with readouts or facilitate users to do these themselves?
Great question. And I will, to that, just say, I would make that dependent on, there's no preconceived decision from the CIRM side as to how we would view that. Once you have a good idea of who your clientele would be, who are the people interested in coming, then I would base this decision that you just asked about on that. You know, what is it that people need? Do they want to come and learn to do it? Or do you have a huge ask from many labs that are, let's say, zebrafish labs or Drosophila labs, and themselves have no interest in human embryonic stem cell or human stem cell modeling, but would love an opportunity to come to your core and be conducting very specific experiments and leave. So it really depends on who your customers, so to speak, will be.
And what are the criteria for 6.1 versus 6.2? It says 6.1 targets California nonprofit research institutions that currently do not conduct or conduct very limited stem cell-based modeling research at their institution. Says UCSF has received CIRM 1.0 funding for shared facilities in the past. Does that exclude UCSF from 6.1?
So when you write your proposal for a 6.1 application, you must explain how your core will increase participation, how it is focused on increasing participation in geographic areas of California where stem cell-based modeling is currently limited. So I did talk about an opportunity, for instance, to develop a core that offers remote cloud-based research. And so that obviously, the limits are then only, who has access to good enough internet, perhaps, but would certainly be eligible, or you could make the argument that you're reaching geographic areas where stem cell-based modeling is currently limited. Now, if a UCSF offers people to come to the core, if that's locally and mostly regionally, that would not you would not be having a good argument about expanding the geographic use of models. So it's up to you to make the argument how you're increasing use of stem cell-based modeling opportunities in geographic areas that have limited modeling abilities currently.
Thank you. Could the core facility provide, say, a brain organoid model service to a medical researcher and use their human disease model and GE-corrected model PSCs as a service, but also participating in that research? I think this is getting to, you're not supposed to have your own research program within the SRL.
Now, I mean, you could certainly, like Janie just said, the operational funds are not meant for specific research projects. Now, that doesn't preclude, research projects to take place in the core with other funding, and some of that funding could be the core's own team that obviously has their own. There will be some of the team members will have their own laboratories, and they could collaborate. So if new collaborations get created, for instance, through these cores, I would consider that a win. Just make sure that the way you think about that is that it is not at the expense of bringing in as much folks who really need help with learning or having access to modeling, as opposed to serving those who already know very well how to model. But I don't see an issue with using the core basically to bring in researchers who currently don't know how to model and collaborate with them. But the operational funds wouldn't be used, directly for the research support. I hope that makes sense. Again, I can clarify if some of this is not clear if you contact me.
And what happens if you are unable to reach 50% funding through recharges in phase C?
Well, good question. You'll be proposing a way to do that, but as in any project that is funded, things happen, and projects sometimes don't exactly deliver the way they had originally anticipated they would, and so we'll be looking at that first during what's called pre-funding administrative review. If you are approved for funding by the board, before we issue the notice of award, we'll work with the applicants to establish operational milestones. So there's already an opportunity for CIRM and the awardee to discuss potential risks and the risk mitigation that had been proposed. And that will be a part of it, but then we'll be also establishing these operational milestones, and none of that is set in stone at the moment, but we'll have an opportunity to talk and negotiate how we're going to set up these operational milestones and what we'll do in the case that you just described.
Would it be possible to propose a modeling facility that has an R&D side that helps those create their own model systems, and then have a service to take that model and run, say, screens with the model?
This particular opportunity is not meant to really drive model development. It's meant to be a core of existing models that we would like to enable those researchers who've already developed the models to share. So to improve. On the other hand, we do understand that the stem cell based modeling field is by no means set and done, and lots of innovation does happen. And I did talk about, for instance, reproducibility efforts we'll be talking about as part of the steering committee for the network. And so I think part, of what you're asking is, about coordinating perhaps as a group, to see how we can improve perhaps on certain aspects of these models. And I see Rosa might want to say something about that.
Yeah, I was just going to add, Uta, that, this is a competency hub that we are providing for the goals that you have stated. There are upcoming programs that, if you keep an eye, will enable more of this development, model development, especially in the neuro field, but non-neuronal could be, other diseases could be through these two opportunities as well. But in September, at the latest, because it might be earlier, but at the latest, we are planning to present a new concept to the board that will be talking about some of this scope of work. So stay tuned.
Thank you. All right. Carl Willert says, I understand the emphasis on human stem and progenitor cells, but is there any possibility or scenarios to include the use of model organisms?
I'm afraid the answer is no. These particular cores are really supposed to be dedicated to human stem cell based and progenitors based models. If you read the fine print, we do include direct conversion, as part of this definition, direct conversion of human somatic cells into some other cell type that you're trying to model. But no, it all has to be a human in vitro models.
And Craig Walsh says, following up on the sustainability question, are we considering ramping? Do we consider ramping facilities charges to investigators using core resources as we enter phase C? Core facilities are rarely independently sustainable, so I'm curious about some potential models for this.
Absolutely. I mean, that would be the expectation, that, for instance, so if it's researchers who come to your core, who want to use it to test certain hypotheses, the assumption would be certainly in the CIRM ramp down phase and long-term sustainability, they would bring their own funding to ask those questions and would pay the core to run those experiments for or with them. And then in terms, similarly, you can certainly imagine, if you want to for continued training of researchers, that there could be workshops, let's say, that people pay to take. Rosa?
That's something, and the sustainability part is something that, as you know, the development of this concept came from us discussing with different stakeholders that had already been funded through the past shared resource labs. And we found that that was an issue, and we want to figure out a way to solve it. So something that I would ask is that applicants, grantees, as this program develops, if you see a need for further funding, come and talk at the board meetings and say, you know, this is a need that we have, because that will help us justify further funding for further sustainability. You know, it might just be that the timeline that we've provided is not enough, so we might need a bit more time, you might need a bit more time to make it more fully sustainable. So that's the kind of ask that you could provide in terms of feedback to us and our board.
Excellent. And we have a final question. It says, operational budget for establishing SRLs is limited. Can plastic or cell culture reagents be purchased with funds for equipping the ESRL?
Now, consumables like that cannot be charged under equipment funds. I understand the reason for your question, because it's a generous equipment budget. But I do want to re-emphasize that at least you have one opportunity to move funds that are traditionally charged under operations, under supplies, which is equipment maintenance. We did come up with a way for you to fund that under the equipment budget. And you'll see in the beautiful spreadsheet that we created that you have that opportunity to do that.
Excellent. So we're coming up on the hour, and I'll wrap up the Q&A time. And as Uta mentioned, that you can reach out to her or others to ask further questions and get greater detail. And the goal for this slide deck is to have it up on YouTube as a webinar for you to refer to. And thank you, Uta and Rosa and Doug, for answering questions. And I will let you say some final words.
Thanks, Janie. And thank you, everybody, for being here. And yes, please contact me with any questions. Happy to help. Goodbye, everybody.